a comforting story for the heart. In the quiet little town of Lake Harmony, Minnesota, there was an old wooden bench beside a peaceful lake. Most people walked past it without thinking twice. In summer, children ran by it with sticky ice cream hands and loud laughter. In autumn, orange and red leaves gathered around its legs. In winter, snow covered it like a soft white blanket. In spring, wildflowers bloomed nearby as if nature itself had decided the bench should never feel lonely. But to Eleanor Hayes, that bench was not just a bench. It was the last place she had truly laughed with her husband, and the first place she would one day learn how to live without him. Eleanor was 72 years old and lived alone in a small white house at the edge of town. It had blue shutters, a porch swing that creaked in the wind, and a mailbox that leaned slightly to one side. Her rose bushes were overgrown, her curtains were always half closed, and inside her kitchen, 2 coffee mugs still hung beside the stove. Only one of them had been used in the last 3 years. Her husband, Walter Hayes, had passed away on a cold November morning after 46 years of marriage. 46 years. That kind of love doesn't disappear when someone dies. It stays in the walls, in the floorboards, in the quiet hum of the refrigerator at night, in the empty side of the bed, in the habit of setting out 2 plates before remembering there is only one person left to eat. For the first year after Walter died, Eleanor barely left the house. Neighbors brought casseroles and pies. Friends from church called every week. Her daughter, Melissa, who lived in Chicago, begged her to move in. "Mom," Melissa would say over the phone, "you don't have to do this alone." But Eleanor always gave the same answer: "I'm not ready to leave this house." What she never said out loud was the truth. If she left the house, it would feel like losing Walter all over again. So she stayed. She moved through her days slowly, as if every task weighed more than it should. She watered plants she forgot to care about. She watched old game shows with the volume low. She folded Walter's flannel shirts and kept them in the same drawer, even though no one would ever wear them again. At night, she would sit in the dark living room and listen. Not for anything real, just for memory. For the sound of Walter's boots by the door, for the soft clearing of his throat before he asked what was for dinner, for his low laugh when she complained about the weather. Grief has a strange way of turning silence into noise, and noise into ache. 3 years passed that way, not quickly, not gently, just one quiet day after another. Then, one rainy April morning, something changed. Eleanor woke before sunrise. The sky outside was pale gray and raindrops tapped lightly against the kitchen window. The house felt especially still that morning, too still, almost like it was holding its breath. She made herself a cup of coffee, wrapped a faded knitted cardigan around her shoulders, and stood at the sink staring into the wet backyard. A robin landed on the fence. The feeder swing swung in the wind. And then, without warning, a memory returned. It came so clearly it almost felt real. 30 years earlier, she and Walter had driven to the lake on a rainy morning just like this one. She had complained the whole drive there. "Walter, honestly, we could have stayed home. It's raining." Walter laughed and parked the truck near the shore. "Ellie," he said, smiling, "the world is still beautiful in the rain, sometimes especially in the rain." They had sat together on an old wooden bench by the water, sharing turkey sandwiches and terrible coffee from a thermos. The rain had rippled across the lake. Walter had told one of his awful jokes. She had rolled her eyes and laughed anyway. It had been one of the simplest days of her life, and somehow one of the happiest. The memory hit her so hard that Eleanor had to grip the kitchen counter. Her breath caught in her throat. Then, without fully deciding to, she set down her coffee, she put on her shoes, grabbed her coat, picked up her car keys, and drove to the lake. The road to Lake Harmony Lake curved through pine trees and sleepy neighborhoods where porch lights still glowed in the early morning dark. By the time Eleanor parked, the rain had softened into a cold mist. The lake was nearly empty. A fisherman stood near the dock. A jogger passed in the distance. And there it was, the bench. Old now, weathered, a little crooked, its paint long gone, moss clinging to one side, but still there, still waiting. Eleanor stood frozen for a moment. Then she walked towards it. Her knees ached, her hands trembled, the wind stung her cheeks. When she finally sat down, the wood groaned softly beneath her. And suddenly, before she could stop herself, she began to cry. Not quiet tears, not polite tears, not the kind people hide behind a smile and say, "I'm okay." These were deep, shaking tears, the kind that come when something inside you has been too full for too long. She cried for Walter, for the empty house, for all the mornings she woke reaching for someone who was no longer there, for birthdays and anniversaries, for the ordinary Tuesdays that hurt more than holidays, for every story she still wanted to tell him, for every sentence that no longer had a listener. The lake said nothing. The wind said nothing. And somehow that silence felt kind. She stayed there until her breathing slowed, until the tears softened, until the sky grew brighter. Then she noticed something. Carved into the side of the bench, faded by time, were two initials. W plus E. Her fingers moved over the letters. Walter had carved them there years ago with his pocket knife. She remembered it instantly. "Really?" she had said that day. "We're teenagers now?" Walter grinned. "No," he said. "Teenagers are still learning what love is. We already know." A small, broken laugh escaped her lips. Then, for the first time in years, Eleanor spoke out loud into the morning air. "I miss you, Walter." The words disappeared into the mist above the lake, but saying them felt like opening a window in a room that had been closed too long. That morning became the beginning of something. Not the end of grief, not forgetting, not moving on in the way people sometimes say it as if love should be packed away and stored away. No, it was the beginning of learning how to live with love that no longer had a place to land. The next morning, Eleanor returned, then the next, then the next. Sometimes she brought coffee, sometimes she brought a blanket, sometimes she brought nothing at all. She just sat. She watched the sunrise spread pink and gold across the lake. She watched geese argue at the water's edge. She watched ducks drift lazily in circles as if they had nowhere urgent to be. And slowly, very slowly, something inside her began to change. The grief didn't disappear, it never does, but it stopped feeling like drowning. It started to feel more like an ocean she had finally learned to float in. One cool morning in early May, Eleanor sat on the bench with a paper cup of gas station coffee warming her hands. The sky was clear, and the water looked like glass. Then she heard small footsteps behind her. "Excuse me," a little voice said. Eleanor turned. A little girl about 8 years old stood there in a yellow raincoat and purple rain boots, holding half a peanut butter sandwich in one hand. "Can I sit here?" the girl asked. Eleanor looked at the empty half of the bench and pretended to think. "Well," she said, "I suppose I can make room." The little girl climbed up beside her with the fearless confidence only children have. For a moment they sat quietly. Then the girl looked out at the lake and said, My mom says this is the best place in town to feel less sad. Oh? Eleanor asked. The girl nodded seriously. She cries here sometimes. There was something so honest about the way she said it that Eleanor almost smiled. And what do you think? Eleanor asked. The girl took a bite of her sandwich and chewed thoughtfully. I think the ducks are funny. Eleanor laughed, a real laugh, warm, surprised, and almost unfamiliar. The girl looked pleased. My name is Lucy, she said. Eleanor. Lucy pointed toward the water. That duck is chasing the other duck. Looks that way, Eleanor said. Maybe he stole his bread. That sounds possible, Eleanor said. Lucy nodded as if this was excellent detective work. Then a woman's voice called from the path. Lucy!